Operations, sharing best practices, and Tom Wright, the Energizer, former commissioner of the CFL and former director of operations for UFC, where he actually helped secure the sanctioning of MMA as a sport in this province and establish long-term broadcast agreements as well. Dave Andrews is the president and CEO of the AHL since 1994, actually, and back in 2001, he helped create one of the biggest expansion efforts in hockey history when 9 new teams came into the league. Graham Brown is the president and CEO of U Sports, and prior to U Sports, he was the CEO of Rugby Canada. Brian Burke, as you know, over 20 years of experience, the NHL GM to 5 teams, including the Anaheim Ducks, Stanley Cup winners. And Nick Sakiewicz, commissioner of the National Lacrosse League. He actually played a crucial role in the recent launch of NLLTV.com. He previously worked 2 decades in MLS, and some of his work there included leading 2 inaugural teams as president and GM. That was in Tampa and New York. So developments in league operations, sharing best practices. Tom?
Carolyn, thank you very much. I'm going to move over here. I've always wanted to stand behind a Sportsnet mic. How cool is this? Oh, sorry, it's a fan, 590 fan. Tuesday morning is always a tough morning. Apparently, there's a lot of partying last night, so I want everybody to stand up for just 1 second. Stand up for a second. There you go. Okay, just move your arms a bit. Come on, it's okay. I know it's tough. But you look at these. We've got 4 amazing, incredibly talented, incredibly experienced individuals who are here today to share what they call best practices. Okay, now you can sit down for a second. Trevor, you can sit down too. Okay, so we always hear this term best practices, and so, I want you to indulge me for a second because I'm going to explain what a best practice is. This is according to Investopedia. Best practices are a set of guidelines, ethics, or ideas that represent the most efficient or prudent course of action. Best practices are often set forth by an authority, such as a governing body or management, depending on circumstances. And while best practices generally dictate the recommended course of action, some situations require that industry best practices be followed. So think of industry best practices. We're talking about best practices for the sports industry. And we've got 4 incredibly talented and experienced individuals to talk about that. I'm going to present to these guys different subject areas and get their feedback on how we can learn from best practices from their leagues and other leagues to help implement some changes and some opportunities and take advantage of things that are going on in the marketplace. Subject areas are going to be social media, the do's and don'ts. University college as a pathway to professional sports. Really interested to hear Graham's perspective on that. Something that I'm sure is going to be warm and dear to everybody in this room's heart, cannabis and sports. Broadcast rights fees, that's a really interesting area that it's a huge pie, but that pie is shrinking. A level playing field. Not all franchises of sports are equal in development or potential, so how do you manage equality in a market of inequality? Analytics in sport. I think there was a panel yesterday that spent some time on analytics. At what point should the leagues take a role in providing support and providing funding or providing resources for analytics when a lot of the analytics have been driven by the teams? Athlete health and safety, that's an obvious one. And pace of play. Time is scarce and alternatives are plenty. And there's some best practices that we can learn from sports. So let's first start with social media, the do's and don'ts, finding a league policy sweet spot. And so here's some facts which probably won't surprise you. There are 3.2 billion people are actively users of social media. That's 42% of the global population. Facebook remains the market leader. There are 65% of the North American population is on Facebook. Daily usage of social media, this won't surprise you as well. Millennials, tell me what percentage of the millennial population is on social media? Anybody have an idea?
90.
Close, 90%. Gen X, 78%. People like me, 50%. Big numbers. And the time spent per day is over 2 hours. So when you think about it, you think about how all pervasive and how dominant social media has become. We've seen it. We see it every day. We saw it last week with what happened in different sports. So if you're a league, and I'm actually going to start with Nick and the National Lacrosse League. If you're a league and you want to try to set some guidelines and some policies for your players, for your coaches, for your teams, to be able to utilize social media the way you feel for your league it can best be utilized, what are the do's and don'ts?
Well, for the National Lacrosse League, it's been a revitalization. We're going into our 34th year, which is pretty amazing that the league's been around that long, and there hasn't been really infrastructure or policies in that league for 30 of those 34 years. So we're really, kind of like a 34-year-old startup business where we're laying in a lot of these policies. We are innovative, however, and I think there's a lot of best practices from other leagues that we could learn from. We've employed a few things at the National Lacrosse League to get our players more engaged in social media. And so one of the things we did this past September is we held a Players Business Summit. And a good portion of it was around the use of social media and how to use social media to develop not only their personal brands, but also help promote the league. And we're going to be doing that on an ongoing basis. The players have incredible power at their fingertips, literally, with their mobile devices and with the social media channels that they're on. And they have a real power to market the league, engage fans, get positive communication out there. And when you talk about, best practices, what is best practice? Best practices is really founded in really good research and communication of that information. And as an example, the NLL has existed for 30 years before I became commissioner, really didn't have a plan for the dissemination of that information. Some of our teams, here in Toronto, in Buffalo, in Calgary, were pulling in, 15,000 people a game, but no one really knew about it. And other teams didn't know how to execute on that. So we're using social media to actually communicate more broadly the good things that are going on with some of our best teams. And it's early days, we're employing our players to do that. But that takes a lot of education and a lot of really important best practices for them, because there's two edges to the sword of social media that you could get really jammed up in. So we're beginning, it's early days for the NLL, beginning to meet with our players on an ongoing basis to educate them on how to use social media, where to use it, when to use it, the tonality that they should use in social media to make sure we manage a positive message.
Great, Nick. So I'm going to move over to Dave, President and CEO of the American Hockey League. I'm positive the NHL has a very rigorous, if I use that term, social media policy. Were you with the AHL? Did you develop your own? Did you take some cues from the NHL? How do you, when you know that eventually a lot of your players are going to end up in the NHL, how do you manage, from a best practices point of view, how you deal with this with the AHL?
Surprisingly, we haven't really had to manage our players in terms of behavior online or in social media that's unacceptable in our view. Or there's the odd thing that comes forward, and once in a while we've had a conversation with a player or with an official. We've had some issues with our officials over the years. But for the most part, all of that interaction with our fan base has been really positive and productive. And as Nick said, building that relationship between the player and the fan is really a big part of any brand strategy now. And it's not rocket science. If you're in the American Hockey League or you're in any of the other leagues other than the NFL and the NHL and the NBA, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what your brand strategy needs to look like. Those leagues are doing it. They're all over it. I was listening to Marianne yesterday here from the NFL and some of their strategies, and if you hear from Heidi Browning at some point with the NHL, I mean, it is all about selling the passion in your game and the connection between your fans and your players, and that's what young people want. It's what millennials want. The kind of content that people are looking for is what you're trying to give them. So your brand strategy relative to social media, digital platforms, etc., needs to really be focused on how are you most likely to engage fans, develop new fans, support the fans you have, and give them what they're looking for. And I think fans everywhere are looking for the same stuff, and we're able to kind of piggyback on what we see other leagues doing and try to drive that same kind of content for our fan base.
Burke?
Yeah, it's like skydiving to me. The failures are rare, but really catastrophic. The rest of the time it works, right? So you're going to have problems with social media. And anyone here ever skydive? The waiver you sign, it says you might die today. And then it says a little later on, you might die today. And then it says a little later on, you might die today. You got to sign the waiver before they take you up in the plane, but you usually don't die. So to me, this is I think it was said yesterday, the volume and the strength of social media is such a great asset for our league and our players that you're going to have to live with the odd catastrophe.
Grant?
Well, I think to Brian's skydiving, I think social media was probably become more mainstream, so it's more like an airplane now, that if you don't have it and you don't manage it properly, it's going to have catastrophic effects. But more importantly, I think with social media now is it's moving into replacing what was traditional media. There are communities now that have sports teams, and I can use lots of them in Ontario, where they've lost their newspaper, they've lost their sports channel at night. Social media is not that personal communication vehicle now. It's becoming your mainstream vehicle of communicating, selling tickets, and where people used to focus on social media being a platform that you could spell things wrong, you could do it in less than 150 characters now. Now you have to have video, you have to communicate, people are using it to present things, to sell things, and when I look at, once again, in Ontario, using that as an example, take Barrie, Guelph, who've lost their newspaper. If you're not on social media in there with your sports properties, then you are not selling tickets, you're not telling people, telling fans, telling your story. And so I think there's been this real traditional move, as you have seen in other communication vehicles in social media, from uniqueness to mainstream to eventually it's going to be the only stream. And unfortunately, when I look at what's going on with newspapers, and take the Globe and Mail for an example, it's really a tough place to be right now. And social media are replacing that. And to Brian's point, sure, you're going to probably one day with social media, fall down, and it's going to be catastrophic. But right now, you're seeing people adopt and transition social media into what is becoming a primary vehicle.
Great. I'm going to stay with you, Graham, because the next topic I want to bring up is university and college athletics as a pathway to professional sports. Excuse me. The statistics, and I only have NCAA statistics. It'd be interesting to hear yours, Graham, from U Sports. But if you look at the number of NC2A athletes that end up in professional sports in the U.S. In baseball, it's just under 10%. Goes all the way down to men's basketball, which is at like 1.2%. Women's basketball is 0.9%. Football at 1.6%, and men's ice hockey is at just under 7%. So when you think of it as a pathway, and I'm interested in your comments, Graham, because I remember when I've looked at college sports in Canada, it was, and this is my own sort of perspective, it was that, go to university to get a degree, play some sports and really get everything out of the whole university experience, but don't go to university in Canada as a pathway to professional sports. Whereas I think that it's somewhat flipped on its head in the U.S., where a lot of individuals, particularly at the NCAA level, where it is such a huge business, that if you're on a full ride scholarship in many sports of the U.S., your college degree is completely secondary. So how do you look at college and universities as a pathway to professional sports, and when does it work best?
No question, youth sports and NCAA are completely different. We're student-athlete focused first, and the irony is there are 1,300 NCAA institutions across the 3 levels, and I would suggest that if you're not playing football in the Power 5, you're probably not going to the NFL. If you're not playing basketball in the top 50 basketball programs in the NCAA, you're probably not going to the NBA. And so I think there's a misnomer that NCAA is your pathway to professional sport. I think it's a pathway. In Canada, we don't prioritize it. And I say that ironically, we've just, in youth sports, for those of you who don't know, work with the CPL now. We now allow our athletes to play pro soccer in Canada. Granted, it's not making a ton of money, but you can play pro soccer and still hold your eligibility in youth sports. We have that in the CEBL. You can play in the CEBL right now and get paid. And for as long as I can remember, and Trevor and Burke will know this, you can play in the CHL and get your education package, which is essentially, a scholarship of sorts and professional and to some degree. So it's all different. I think right now in Canada, the focus, student athlete first. And if you can go to the CFL, and Tom, you're aware of this, good for you. No one's getting rich off that. So I think it's just simply about positioning where you're at. But I don't think there's anybody who goes into university in Canada and has any misconceptions about what you're really there for. You're there to get an education.
Mm-hmm. Brian, you went to university in the U.S.?
Yeah, I was a walk-on freshman and went on a half scholarship second year and full ride my last 2 years. And I would I agree mostly with what Graham said, but if you're not in a Power 5 football program, the odd thing is every roster in the NFL has a guy from some school you never heard of, including a dozen Canadian kids. So this guy played at Wyoming, or this guy played at New Mexico State, and they're D1, the odd Harvard guy plays, a D1, but, so to me, I agree with that basic premise. So unless you're at a high-powered program, and it's going to get worse. The rich are getting richer in college football and basketball, and if they go to pay for play and this likeness to image money, it's going to, the gap and the gulf between the haves and have-nots will continue to grow at a rapid rate. So to me, I always viewed my degree was very important to me, way more than if I got a chance to play pro hockey. I never thought I would get a chance to play. I ended up playing in Springfield and signing with the Flyers and playing the next year in Maine, but that was all like a remote dream to me. My key was to get my degree and, get to law school at some point.
So Nick, from your perspective, and I'm interested because is there a role, or should there be a role at the professional league level, like at the NLL, to actually have a formal relationship with the NC2A in the U.S. or other colleges, programs, the youth sports here in Canada, and are there any advantages to having that kind of relationship?
No question. And we have, and I did this in soccer for 2 decades, and it's beneficial because we're headquartered in Philadelphia, where you have 5 major schools with sports management programs. But internships is probably the best experience and pathway to pro sports on the business side. The athletes, a little bit of a different story. Each sport has its own nuance. I'm in lacrosse now. The vast majority of our players come through the collegiate system and get drafted into our league. But on the executive side, there's really nothing better than collaborating with a team or a league in order to get a real taste of what working in sports is all about. It is, I'll be 27 years in sports this year. It is a lifestyle sport, or lifestyle business rather, or profession. It's a lot of work, and as a young student coming out of college, or even when you're in college, to be able to participate in real internship programs, not just, doing work for the sake of work. But when I was running the team in Philadelphia, and now we have our league office headquartered there, we gain a lot of advantage by putting interns in sports management programs to real work inside our office, and they get paid. There's a stipend and compensation with that, but most importantly, they get real valuable on-the-job training, if you will. And it works both ways. We as a league, we get to test drive potential employees, and I think we're on our 2nd or 3rd hire now during our time in Philadelphia of kids right out of school that have interned with us for a year and then have found themselves into full-time positions. Same thing at the team level. You get a real insight, and I think that's the best pathway if you can find a real internship program, not just some job where you're moving boxes and setting up tables, but doing real marketing work, doing real sales work, doing real team operations work, real communications work, and they're out there.
I'll bet. Go ahead, Dave.
Tom, if I just throw in, so before there was U Sports, there was CIS. Before there was CIS, there was CIAU.
You're dating
And
yourself.
I owe my career to having played U Sports, which was then CIAU. I did not have a professional playing career in the National Hockey League, but I played at Dalhousie, and I went to Europe after that and came back and played at UBC. And without Dalhousie and without UBC, I would have never, ever had a career in professional sports, both for the kind of springboard they provided and the network that I had from having played there, but more importantly, from what I learned by being a university athlete. So I think, in Canada, the programs that are there and what they do for student athletes play a pretty important role in your future careers. And a lot of people, very successful people in Canada in business and in sport, would tell you that their experience as a student athlete played a big role in that. So for me, there's different ways university sports contributes, and that's certainly, I don't know where I would be without having played at Dalhousie and UBC.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, guys. I'm going to switch to a different topic, cannabis. This time last year, October 17th, I think was when cannabis was legalized here in Canada. It's now been a year later, and apart from the stock market going down so badly, it's been, I would say, mixed reviews as to what's happened. But I'm interested in these guys' perspective as it relates to cannabis and sports, and the current position that your leagues have, or the sports that you're involved with have, as it relates to usage. In different sports, it's considered a banned substance, still is. NHL doesn't classify that, and CFL doesn't test for recreational drugs, but Major League Soccer, the NBA, the NFL, and MLB have pretty strong programs that test for cannabis. It continues to be uncharted water. I'm just wondering, within this kind of evolving environment, how are you managing the change, and how do you get it right to make sure that you're understanding these natural changes that are happening in life, but how it impacts on sport? And maybe I'll start with you, Graham.
Okay, so I'm going to give you two sides. I'm going to give you a personal and I'm going to give you a professional. The personal side is, the world's changing. Certainly in Canada, we're leading certain perspectives on it. And I have a real problem with how sport approaches it. And so now I'll jump to the professional side. CCS in Canada, U Sports, we test. We're I don't know how many tests we do a year, but let's assume we do 1,000 tests. And every year, a large number of our athletes get tested and then found out they have a positive test for cannabis. My challenge is that the stigma associated with that athlete is no different than if they're on anabolic steroids. They have a positive test, they're going to get identified. No one knows what the test is for. They go through, and forever they're going to be identified through CCS. If you go on and Google Graham Brown, if I had a positive test, it doesn't know what it was for. It just says I had a positive CCS test. And my professional side says, we need to decide whether or not cannabis is going to be, a performance-enhancing drug that we test for. Not every league does, we do. And what's the outcome, and what are you trying to achieve? So right now, we're in debates as to whether or not we actually, identify cannabis within our CCS and our WADA. On the personal side, it's simply, is it performance-enhancing, and what impact is that going to have, and what are we really trying to accomplish when we test our athletes? And I don't think what we're trying to do is to associate a positive test and the stigma associated with that for cannabis right now. We have to make a decision soon.
Dave?
Well, we're fortunate we're able to follow the lead of the National Hockey League again in this particular space, and we test for performance-enhancing drugs. We also test for recreational drugs, but there is no suspension involved in the American Hockey League for use of recreational drugs. Really, the testing is there for the safety of the players, and where the testing program identifies a player who has dangerously high levels of any of those recreational drugs, including alcohol, there is a program in place to get help for that player. But in terms of what do we rule on, where do we suspend players, that's directly tied simply to performance-enhancing substances.
And Nick?
Yeah, we have the same policy. I mean, it's a banned substance. Our sport, like hockey, is dangerous to play, and when your senses are affected, you put other players in danger. So we're very strong on not permitting these substances, and we do test. We are, however, evaluating the emergence of CBD, which is medical marijuana, medical cannabis that has extracted the THC element in it, and there's a lot of real compelling evidence that it is very good for, it means helped cancer patients for many, many years. It's helping injury. There's a number of high-profile athletes now that are getting behind the CBD aspect, or CBD product, if you will. So we're evaluating that very closely right now.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's really going to be something that's going to become clearer as the years come by, and clearer as more empirical data is provided. Because I agree completely and I think back to the sport that I was most recently involved with was mixed martial arts with the UFC. And we had several athletes that used cannabis principally to help with pain management and help in recovery. And I think that you're going to find, as time moves forward, that there's going to be a much more acceptable approach to using the kind of cannabis that you're talking about, Nick, as alternatives to opioids and painkillers, which obviously have turned into a real crisis across the country. Brian, from your perspective, I mean, you've been around a long time. How do you feel about this?
Well, I'm not. The legalization or decriminalization of marijuana to me is. I do. The experts will tell you it is a portal drug. It is. It's not just having a joint. It is a portal drug. At some point, many people find the high they get from marijuana no longer is sufficient, and they upgrade. They go to cocaine or something else. So I don't think it's as simple as just let's make it decriminalize it. There's no long-term research into the health effects of it. That troubles me. But the distinction with the CBD, like Nick said, is, and I read this somewhere, I don't know if it's true, so I don't want anyone to quote me on it, but I read this, that the biggest consumer of CBD products is the U.S. military for pain management. So that's the distinction, right? With no THC, no hallucinogenic effect. But that's still illegal. What my big fear is, working in Canada, is one of our players is going to lug this stuff on a plane and get caught. And the U.S. doesn't care that it's legal here in Canada. You bring it into the U.S. So that's a big fear on the team level, is make sure you bring the right shaving kit, guys. Make sure that if you're using it on your shoulder, you can't have it in your bag. So to me, that's going to be the distinction. At some point, the medical marijuana or medical cannabis, CBD, is going to be widespread usage, and the other thing's going to be frowned upon more, but we'll see.
One of the interesting questions, Tom, that we will all be facing, and we are already facing, is the opportunity to generate revenue from the producers of CBD and the producers and marijuana producers. We have just been kind of...
Rink boards.
Yes, exactly. We've been going fairly slow on the whole CBD naming rights for buildings side of things, and our owners are starting to ask the question, or what are our rules relative to CBD marketing, and what are our rules relative to cannabis marketing, and I'm just not returning their calls for now.
Yeah, the leagues have struggled with that, because for a long time there was a ban on hard liquor advertisements in arena.
point.
And then Viagra. No one was allowed to sell Viagra ads. Now you can. CBD will be the next frontier.
Dave, just following up on what Brian was saying about traveling between Canada and the U.S. If you take a look at your league, which has teams on both sides of the border, do you find do you advocate to the teams to manage their players and make sure that they have the right shaving kit, as Brian suggested, or what kind of proactivity does the league have?
Absolutely. We before the season started, beginning last year, we correspond with all of our clubs relative to cross-border travel and make them clearly aware that carrying any of that across the border is likely to keep a whole team locked up for a while at the border, and one player will be in some serious, hopefully only one, be in some serious trouble. But we do communicate. We are proactive, and we have, knock on plastic, not had an issue as yet.
Do you do the same thing, Nick?
Yeah, actually, the majority of our players are crossing the U.S.-Canadian border every weekend. The vast majority of the players currently are Canadian box lacrosse players, so we have a lot of travel back and forth. And thankfully, touch wood, we haven't had any issues, and our players but we don't take that for granted. So communication between the players, the team management and the players is really important on what they should be obeying in terms of cross-border. It's really important.
I think at a team level, it's an interesting issue too. I mean, from the league's perspective, we don't have to deal with it very often, but I know we've had situations where now U.S.-based teams with a Canadian player find a player overusing marijuana or using marijuana in a hotel room while the team's traveling, and what position does the team take on that? And hopefully they have a clear set of team rules that will be put in place, but not put in place, but acted on. But there are some, kind of ethical questions there relative to the legality of marijuana in certain states in the U.S. and how do teams police it with their players.
And the security, when you travel, and by the way, I want to put a plug in for Nick's product. The lacrosse is a great game to watch. If you haven't attended a game, go. It's a fantastic live experience. When you cross the border into the U.S., travel inside the U.S. or inside Canada, the security is reduced, relaxed. So a bus, you leave from the arena, you get on the bus, it drives right out onto the tarmac. They usually they check every fifth or sixth player with a wand and go through your bag briefly, but it's pretty lax. When you go from Canada into the U.S., you have to clear normal U.S. customs. So when the Toronto Maple Leafs fly to wherever they go, you go through the same terminal, the same security as any other passenger that goes to the U.S. There's no relaxation of the guidelines at all when you cross the border. When we come back into Canada, when I work for the Canucks or work for the Flames or work for the Leafs, they'll come out, the customs immigration people will come out to the plane and meet you, off you go. But when you go into the U.S., there's no relaxation, you can't bend any rules, you can't take any shortcuts. Someone's going to get caught.
Completely. Absolutely. And I think it is only a matter of time, and that's sort of, I guess it's somewhat like the skydiving situation you were referring to.
I thought that
earlier.
was a really clever analogy.
That's a really good analogy. That shit's going to happen, right? Yeah. It does. Okay, I'm going to switch it over to broadcast fees. There's unquestionably there's increasing competition for ostensibly a shrinking pie, or at least a very different kind of a pie. In the U.S., sports rights are estimated at just under $25 billion, and that's about 45% of the total global media market. But this won't surprise you, this stat, and I'm sure the similar numbers are true here in Canada. 44 of the top 50 most watched TV broadcasts were live sports. And that's why broadcasters, new and emerging, covet live sports, because to the extent that they are PVR proof, people want to see it live, where people will binge watch other content that's provided. Everybody knows that. And in North America, the numbers won't surprise anybody. The NFL is over $6 billion annually. Major League Baseball, $3.5 billion. The NBA, almost $3 billion. big numbers, but there are new entrants that are coming in. It's not just the traditional ABC, NBC, and CBSs of my youth. The networks and cable will continue to duke it out. Leagues have their own broadcast digital networks now. Streaming services from YouTube to Hulu to ESPN Plus, and while the pie is bigger, I think that there's just so many different elements that are going into to the pie. So how do you, in this environment of trying to make sure that you get your share of this large pie that tends to go easily to the big properties, how do you stand out and how do you take advantage of what has to be an important revenue driver? And I'll start with you, Nick. I'm interested in how Graham does it with youth sports.
Yeah, no, we could talk about this subject for hours probably. This is an interesting time right now in broadcast television. This is a television today. It's no longer a communication device. Your mobile device, your desktop, your 65-inch screen TV at your home is your computer screen and a television. And it's really interesting. So millennials and Gen Zers, there's 200 million of them in North America now. Vastly larger than baby boomers, which is my generation. We're on our way out. This group is coming, and this group is very digital, it's a makeup of, you look at who the television consumer base is today, and you have three consumers. You have cord shavers that are shaving their cable subscription, cord cutters who are realizing that they don't need cable, and then the real young generation in that group, cord nevers, that will never own a cable subscription. So for us, in a niche league like the National Lacrosse League, we took a strategy 4 years ago of linear's just not for us right now. So we created a digital first strategy to go all in and communicate our product on this because we have a very young audience. And it's working. Last year, we signed our first media rights deal ever in the 33-year history of the league with Turner Sports. We put out our product on a digital over-the-top streaming platform called BR Live. We increased our audience from past year's 6x in our first year, which was tremendous. And we're seeing a media business now that the NLL has that it never had before, and we're able to invest in it because of this new technology. So for us, it's been transformational. And we have a broadcast partner in Turner that is investing real money into the league that allows us to reinvest that money into growth. We never had that with the linear platforms. We just could not get the kinds of rights fees. We're paying a lot of money for production. We weren't getting the ratings because it was a niche sport. But what's best about digital is not only are we able to distribute our product, but we're able to get money for it, and we're able to create a one-on-one relationship, because when that consumer signs up to buy and watch our games, guess what? We have their name, we have their credit card, we have their email address, we have their birthdays. We can begin to engage a one-on-one relationship. So it has been transformational for us.
That's great. Graham, how about you?
I think I have a real unique perspective on this, and Scott Moore was in here earlier on, and no one knocked on Scott's door more than I did, trying to get university sport. You have to have a linear strategy in Canada, but the linear strategy, Stu Johnson and Chris Wilson too, I knock on all their doors. Our primary property, I'd like to have on traditional TV, have it on, linear TV is good, but I think right now, if you're not looking at your sport property from a digital perspective, then you're probably in big trouble. So in youth sports, we have 7,000 games, 4,000 of them are produced digitally, very varying degrees of quality. So if you went to the university campus like Guelph, they have a whole studio set up, and in fact sponsored by Sportsnet. Ryerson's unbelievable. Then you go to somewhere it's a single camera, they struggle a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, Nick, to your point, I come from a household, I'm actually a cord cutter. I follow rugby, I'm a rugby person, and I haven't watched really rugby on traditional, TV in a long time. So I'm used to just, going on my phone, going to my TV, 2 buttons later, whatever's on my phone's on my TV, and I wouldn't pay for that because no one's putting it on TV and paying for it. But I wouldn't want to be in the media business. And, I've had this conversation with Scott before, and the media business is really, it's in trouble in my opinion, and I don't want to get Brian's in that business. I'd watch Burke on TV, and buy a subscription for that. But anyway,
we're in great shape.
yeah. I just think Nick is right on. The households, the young people right now, you're all out there. You're young people. You simply consume content differently. I certainly wouldn't say I have an answer for it, but in universities and our sports, I like the fact that there's no game across Canada on a weekend that you can't watch in one form or another. And if we relied on traditional TV to deliver that, we would never watch it.
But
So,
how many people watch, say, Dalhousie plays St. Mary's? 12?
who cares? But the
No.
fact is that those 12 people have the opportunity to watch.
Well,
it.
I
Yep.
think, and the baby boomers or the Gen X's and the millennials, you can't watch, two people can't watch a goddamn hockey game on a phone. That's why I think you'll always have traditional broadcast. I like watching in my house. I have a second game on my iPad. I like a big screen TV, and yes, I'm not a millennial. Thank God I'm not a millennial.
You would struggle.
No, I did this rant on TV. I went out for lunch about 2 months ago, and these millennials next to me, their food came, and they took pictures of it for at least 4 minutes. 4 goddamn minutes. Their food got cold while they took pictures of it. And then they switched places and took pictures of the other one's food. And then they got the overhead view. And I felt like saying to them, no one that you send those pictures to gives a shit about your food. So
Mark Burke down is undecided on this.
Yeah. I'd like to see Brian work for the NLL, the AHL, or U Sports, and it's just different. You come from an NHL perspective.
I think we have to. I think you're both right. We have to cater to this is the future of the game. However they view it, we've got to provide that. Yes. But I'm saying I don't think the traditional viewing is ever going to go out of style. And the people with the most money that watch sports, that's my era so far. Okay, you look at a Maple Leafs game, like you know what the average Harley rider is? He's 50 years old. 50 years old, and his average income is $125,000 a year. That's none of you people.
Look, cable.
I think Tom too. The depends where you are with your property. Like for the American Hockey League or NLL or U Sports, like for us, streaming is where it's at. I mean, we have linear television. We're on the NHL Network in the U.S. a little bit. We're on TSN. We're on Sportsnet. But the best thing that's happened to us has been streaming. We're on Facebook. We have a rights fee deal with CBS in the U.S. for streaming on their streaming platform. Our own property that we took over a year ago. AHL TV, we tripled our viewership last year. We did over $1 million in revenue, and that was the first year of ownership of our own property. Instead of having a company doing it for us, we pay them for the back end. We own it, we market it, and the outcome has been that the biggest brand detriment that we had as a league was our streaming property. Fans bought it, they overpaid for it, the quality was lousy. And we got more negative feedback from fans on that than we did on officiating, and I'm not making that up. So we felt we had to fix that, and we've now fixed it, and we get more positive feedback from everybody in the hockey industry, plus our fans now, for the quality of our streaming product and the pricing of it. It's a great value, and it's growing and growing, and what it allows us all to do is to actually connect with our own fan base. Linear TV is, if we could do it, if we were a bigger property and we could generate a lot of rights fees, yes, please. But, we know we're not there. But on the streaming side, we are there. And who knew, like a few years back, when we all started to have internet and digital platforms, and people said, how are we ever going to generate revenue from the internet? Well, we're killing it. Like the amount of revenue we generate from streaming and from online advertising and from online merchandise sale and all that stuff, it's significant. So we've learned how to use it, and we're going to have to continue to grow with it.
Yeah, cable's not going away. We all need, if we have single-family homes, we all need Wi-Fi in our house. It is shifting, though. And Gen Z, they're the scariest group coming because they are cord nevers. And you're right, Graham, if you're a cable business, you need to be re-engineering your business and rethinking your business because I think last year, 32% of all live sports was watched on streaming. And that number continues to grow each year, so it's shifting. And yes, Brian, 2 people can watch a live event on an iPhone. I sat and watched the Champions
It's a
League.
lot of fun.
I played a round of golf with my son and watched the Champions League final in a golf cart while we played a round of golf. That's this new generation. They are engaged on their phones.
It sounds like a wonderful day.
It was.
I hate golf too.
Our team won.
Brian Burke with a GoPro on his head. I think you'd get an audience for that, Brian.
We pay a lot of money for that. I'm just going to bring up one last topic, and then I'm going to open it up to have some questions. And it's a topic I think you probably chatted about yesterday, and it has to do with analytics. And as people here would know, we've come a long way since my son-in-law Max's favorite book, Moneyball by Michael Lewis. That was 16 years ago, believe it or not. But there are experts who are predicting that sports analytic market will grow to about $4.5 billion by 2024, and go beyond just player and game performance, understanding fans, sports betting, ticket selling. My question to you guys is that and I don't know the answer as it relates to who leads this and who's leading the sports analytics from not only a business but a performance basis at the team and league level. We clearly have situations in leagues. I'm sure it's the same for you, Nick, as it is for Dave, and certainly Graham in sports, where some sports are healthier than others, some teams are healthier than others, some markets that they're in are bigger, and so some teams have more resources to go out and dive really, really deeply into analytics. And to the point where you're watching on my 65-inch, not an 85-inch. Brian, it's not as big as yours, but I'll watch a football game, and you'll see coaches deciding on in the second quarter whether or not to go on a 3rd and 1 or a 4th and 1, depending on the wind, depending on the score, depending on all sorts of different things, and almost taking the gut instinct out of a coach out of play, because okay, what do the numbers say? And so some teams are going to have more money to spend on those. Some teams are going to be able to put more resources into that. And where does the level playing field? Where does it settle out? Should sport administrators be taking a more active role in saying, we'll do some analytics for you, because not every team can invest at the same level. It's a new and emerging area for sport. It's probably not that new, but it's really becoming developed. Nick, what from your perspective?
It is. I mean, analytics for the last maybe decade has really started to affect the business in 2 areas. The first area is on the player performance side for coaches and performance development to engineer better athletes. And I think there's no question in every sport we're seeing better engineered athletes, and also for health and wellness, to measure players' physical stress and to be able to manage wellness for the players. The other side, which is kind of new and really beginning to get dynamic, is analytics used to drive the business. So sports betting, especially in the US, where we have I think 11 or 13 states maybe now have legalized sports betting. Sports betting is driven by analytics. Broadcasters are hungry for data, performance data from on floor, on field, from the athlete, because again, the younger generation is ravenous for this data. They're using it to get more engaged via sports betting platforms, and they're also using it to enhance the broadcast. So the analytics business is, I think, still evolving in sport. It got its roots in player performance and team performance to win more games, to engineer better athletes. But now, because of the consumer base, remember those millennials and Gen Zs, we keep talking about them, but they are coming, like it or not. They don't just want to buy a ticket and watch a game like us old guys. We're happy to watch a game. They want to be part of the game. They want to be in the game, and analytics helps them be in the game.
Graham?
So I have a huge problem in youth sports right now, in that we are probably traditionally the slowest adapters in sport and at the university, the education level. And so when I look at that, I'd say there's the commercial side of performance analytics for making decisions on high performance. But if you look at it from a consumer base, I can follow a hockey game online without the game, just following it when you go to play-by-play, the shots, the saves, where they are. And young people are consuming that so different. And I'm throwing my colleagues under the bus a little bit, and I have one of my colleagues, Zach Wiesen, he knows this. I'm pushing our schools. Young people want analytics in our university sports system. It's no longer acceptable to give the quarter score, the box score, simply, it was 7-5 at the end of the first quarter. They want play-by-play, by the minute, how did you do it? And statistics or analytics, on the consumer side, I think analytics defers to statistics and how you communicate. On the performance side, you're doing it to make decisions and athlete welfare, and gambling sits somewhere in the middle. But if we do not adapt, young people now are and I'm not even young, and I consume my sports by all the statistical analysis that goes on, and I watch it. And hockey to me is honestly the perfect example, because it's actually meaningful data, where they shot from, how many shots, the save percentages. And if we don't adapt to that and use that, if I were a young person going into university right now, I would absolutely unequivocally get a bit of a grounding in analytics.
Yeah. Well, I think I would agree with Nick. First off, you got to distinguish between business analytics and performance analytics. Yeah. And I think you're at great peril if you're not keeping up on the business analytics side. I think San Jose Sharks are probably the best in our league on the business analytics, as far as who's your customer, what does she want, what does she buy when she's not at the hockey rink. If knowing your customer, predicting your customer's behavior, you ignore that at your peril, because a competitor of yours will master it and they'll steal your customer. So to me, and the league is helpful there. The league actually has invested a lot of money, and they're telling us who our customers are. But you get to a point where you can tell when your season ticket holder gets up in the morning, type thing, right? So how many games we did? Tom Anselmi's here. Tom, remember we did a survey. How many games do you think the average Toronto Maple Leafs season ticket holder goes to?
4.
8. 6. Remember that, Tom? It came back 6, and we said that can't be right. So we brought in a smaller group of loyal season ticket holders and came up with 8. The average person here syndicates their tickets. So you've got to, if it's 4, let's say the 5 of us, 4 of us, we pool our money, we buy season tickets, and we split them up. You got to know 5 customers now, not 1. Now in Calgary, I think the average was somewhere around 24. So it was way more personal experience to the fan in that marketplace. So that's all business analytics, which you ignore at your peril. The sports performance analytics originated in baseball, which lends itself most to analytic analysis. I mean, it's a series of repetitive events, the same distance, same thing, and it has great value. And they've adapted and used it on the playing field more than other sports. We are all trying to catch up on that. And again, you ignore it at your peril, especially if you're in a hard cap system. Because where you're going to get your advantage in a hard cap system is not on player salaries, it's on cheating, it's on performance, it's around, can you get an edge? This is the Toronto Maple Leafs theory. They have invested heavily in analytics. Can you get an edge in a hard cap system? Can you sign a number of European free agents? Can you sign a number of college free agents? Put guys in at entry-level salaries, which allows you to pay your stars and play at the cap. So this is not going anywhere. It's just teams are going to invest in both sides of it. Leagues are going to invest in the business side of it. And I agree, the consumer even now, and I'm an old fart, but I want to see how fast that shot was. Yeah. If it's 106 kilometers an hour, I want the graphic. Mm-hmm. And obviously Sportsnet, we're trying to be on the cutting edge of that. Mm-hmm.
Dave?
Yeah, Tom, I think speaking of the business analytics side, we at the American Hockey League have been, I think, out front ahead of most pro leagues, including the major leagues, in collecting data. I listened to the NFL, Marion from the NFL yesterday, talking about the inability to get the kind of financial data that they need to make decisions and to identify best practices. We've been at it for 10 years. We convinced our owners to share financial information, which was something that was unheard of in terms of both revenue information and expense information. And we're getting real-time data now every day of the season from our teams on ticket sales and on corporate sales. And we have a staff of 3, which in a staff of 15 is a lot of people, who are completely dedicated to the team business side, to analyzing the data that comes in, identifying best practices, communicating those best practices out to our clubs. And my belief is that leagues are successful based on the operational success of their teams. You can have a whole lot of bullshit and spin, but at the end of the day, your teams need to be operationally successful. And we have really driven the needle in the last 10 years. We've been growing at a 5 to 10% rate a year in revenue growth, through some of that through a pretty tough economy. And we really attribute that to this platform that we have. And we've licensed the platform to some other leagues now. All of this stuff is real time. Our owners can go in and see how they're doing against budget. They can see how they're doing against like markets. They can see how they're doing on Saturday nights versus the team in Rochester. It's really powerful stuff. So the business analytics side for us, and that's a different element of the analytics to what Brian was speaking to in terms of identifying who your customers are, which is equally, probably more important. But we have a really good handle on our business, and it's so valuable for our teams in our league.
And let me, Tom, one thing on best practices. Two things we try to say to conference. If you want to work in pro sports, because everyone here says, oh, I want to work in pro sports. If you want your kids to go to the same school with their friends and graduate from the high school and go to the church in your neighborhood, don't work in pro sports. Not on the talent side, not on the finding player side, because everyone moves at least 2-3 times in a successful career. Some people move way more than that because they get fired more frequently. But just don't ignore the size of the business. Like the talent side is only a small number of jobs. We call it talent side. We draft the players, we sign the free agents, we trade them. That's the talent side. That's a small sliver of the pro sports industry. It's much bigger than that. There's the banking side, the broadcast side. Every team has a HR department, has an IT department. And then your kids can go to the same school and graduate with their friends, and you don't lose sleep all the time. You don't kick your dog to death or any of the things that we do. So it is a great industry, but don't overlook how big it is. Don't just focus on what the talent guys do. So that's number one. Number two, this industry, and I agree with Nick, internships are the best way to get started. This industry needs bright young people that care about the game. So we encourage you all to try and make a career out of it if you can. It's a lot more fun than selling insurance.
And your kids will be okay.
And your kids will be fine.
Your dog will be all right, too.
I want to thank Nick and Brian and Graham and Dave, and I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn. Thanks very much, everyone.